Hello and welcome to Women Talkin About AI. In this episode, hosts Jessica and Kimberly welcome Ilkem Kajcan Dipchin, an educator and AI strategist from Istanbul, who shares valuable insights on integrating AI in English medium universities. Faculty members will particularly appreciate her perspective on balancing AI tools with authentic language learning and academic writing development. We hope you enjoy.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Women Talkin Bout AI. Kimberly and I are joined today by a researcher all the way in Istanbul. We're very excited to host Ilkem Kajcan Dipchin. She is an award-winning educator and AI strategist with nearly 2 decades of experience in higher ed. She's a seasoned instructor specializing in English for academic purposes and academic writing, and brings a unique blend of linguistic expertise and technological innovation to her work. Ilkem previously served as the coordinator at Sabancı University School of Languages, and she leads courses on society and humanity and plays a pivotal role in professional development. She's passionate, like Kimberly and I, about bridging academic skills with emerging technologies, with a particular focus on AI literacy and digital critical thinking. So welcome, Ilkem. Thank you for joining us.
Hi, Jessica. Thanks a lot for the great introduction. I'm so glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
It's always nice to see a real human behind a LinkedIn photo. I feel like we interact a lot on LinkedIn, and here you are. In real life. It's nice.
Yeah. It's great to be here.
Yeah, Ilkem, I just want to say quickly, Ilkem and I didn't know her, but I accepted and then turned down a job at a university where I would have met her next year if I had stayed there. Even 1 year, we would have overlapped at the same university in the same probably department because we're both in English for academic purposes.
Oh, yeah,
So
that
just
was
amazing.
Yeah, it is amazing. And like we said, it's a small world. We would have worked in the same university and met face to face. Yeah, that's an interesting story.
Yeah. Sorry to interrupt you, Jessica. Where were you going to go first?
That's what I was actually going to ask. I was going to say that y'all have an interesting story about how you almost worked together in Istanbul, but you already covered that.
Oh.
I'm wondering, was there anything we missed in the bio in terms of your interests and your expertise and your background? We just love to start out by having you discuss that background and like how you came to be passionate about generative AI.
Actually, you didn't miss much. Actually, it was really a great introduction. And yeah, it was all about me. I have been interested in English for academic purposes and academic teaching, academic writing. And especially, I have been working a lot about teaching academic writing to English. That was maybe one of the central areas that I have been working about. Didn't have most, but I have students, but they are all the time just second language. And of course, lately, it's interesting, but I started to have a kind of AI across sectors understanding approach because I have seen that there is a gap between the resources I access in English about generative AI and in Turkish, where, the language where I live. And that's why I started to be much more engaged in learning and maybe also understanding the use of generative AI in business. Because it's very interesting in terms of make generative AI more accessible to larger audience. I have been working stuff, and there are hundreds of people, and I don't think they have structural training about generative AI. And these people work in HR and maybe sales department, finance. For example, just 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to host an event that I talk about generative AI, how it evolved, and how they could make use of it in their daily lives. And more than 60 people joined that session face to face. And the feedback was amazing. The thing that was also very interesting, I used my skills that I bring from education and training to transfer and to translate and communicate this to a larger audience other than academia. So I think lately this has been some kind of a difference for me, and I'm very excited about it. And for example, if you want to learn about business and how I can say corporate world, I still read the same things. Etymology, for example. So he is still helping me. So I think generative AI, as it is a general purpose technology, it brings interdisciplinarity where we work. That's something, I'm sorry it took so long for me to tell you. Yeah, that's the thing.
That's part of what I love about it so much. I agree. It's like suddenly I'm learning about all of these different disciplines. Linguistics is one of them because of Kimberly being an applied linguist. But
Yes.
now I'm suddenly interested in cognitive science and all these
Yeah.
things. I want to go back to something that you said early on because I think that this is interesting and I want to make sure I heard you correctly, which was talking about like how generative AI, yes, can democratize access, but also in the sense of Turkish versus the English language. And I'm wondering, are you using a lot of the same frontier models that we use, like Claude,
Yeah.
GPT-4,
Yeah.
just OpenAI? And what does that look like in terms of Kimberly and I have talked about how we know that these models are
Yeah.
very much reflective of the data they're trained on, like Western
Totally.
educated.
Totally.
What does that look like for you? And what are those conversations you're having about how to address that when you're in a completely different culture?
Yeah, mostly I also communicate in English because of my job, because of the context that I have been working, of course. But I had the chance to try it in Turkish. And of course, most people in business and probably my students also sometimes use it in Turkish because they use translation. And I know that because in my feedback sessions, we exchange ideas. Also, I have been running another research just at the moment with undergrad students about self-regulatory learning in academic writing while using AI. And yeah, they sometimes say that they use translation and they use Turkish. But for example, I have subscription in Cloud, and I think I find it proficient in Turkish. Although sometimes, of course, I can, as a native speaker, understand that it could be a better sentence. I didn't see a very maybe significant drawback when I'm communicating in Turkish. But in the beginning, for example, if you asked me like 2 months ago, because when it brought the voice communication, this audio communication option, we started to use it as a family because I have a son. He's like him to communicate by speaking. And yeah, we were laughing a little bit. The tonation, because we were every day they developed and they got better and better. So now it is totally better in terms of voice, audio, in audio option. Sorry. And one thing, for example, in Perplexity, I think, because I didn't really check for that or research for that, but when I asked in Turkish, it generally answered me in English in Perplexity. So that I'm very sorry. That was why, for example, I thought ChatGPT and Cloud, they are good. But in Perplexity, I didn't get Turkish, for example.
Kimberly, what was that blog post you talked about with the crescents? That's
Yeah.
what I was getting at too, but I couldn't remember the name of
Yeah.
the scholar.
Ilkem, do you want to get a drink of water or anything?
I mean, I have my coffee.
Okay. Yeah, it was Mahabali's blog post called Where Are the Crescents in AI? And that's exactly what I was going to ask you as a follow-up. Like, beyond just the language, have you or your students noticed any cultural? I know Turkey sits in the middle of the Middle East and Europe. It has a very
yeah.
blended culture. So
Yeah.
maybe it's less obvious. Mahabali is in Egypt, and so she's very centered in the Arabic language
Yes.
and the culture of that area.
In my master's thesis, I studied post-colonialism. So it was just the central idea was Orientalism, actually. And it was my central research. Yes, unfortunately, the discourse repeats itself. within these models. Yes, Turkey has really a different political climate, actually, because we are living in a different context than when you look from Europe or the United States. I don't want to generalize anything, but just one example. When I ask text to image models, when I ask to bring picture or image about Turkey, of course, it is totally stereotypical. Just, for example, representative image for Turkey, when I would like to use it for my LinkedIn post, I couldn't get rid of a mosque in the background. It always and always brings it back because, yes, I know Turkey has its codes in terms of people believe in Islam. Generally, it's the case. But on the other hand, it is so much multicultural at the same time. But exactly, I didn't receive any particular observation from my students, but I have been experiencing it many times. And I stopped actually maybe using some text to image generators just because of this reason. All these stereotypical discourse that it comes back. Unfortunately, yes, culturally, it is maybe Ryuko Kubota from British Columbia University in Canada. And she just appropriating of the academic writing. And this is the discussion. I also researched a lot about that. That's why I came up with this intercultural rhetoric research. I mean, it is like there is a dominant hegemonic acceptance of a rhetoric, and students bring their native rhetoric, and then sometimes with clashes, and they have this difficulty on top of learning the language itself, and it becomes a little bit much more. So it happens, it repeats in generative AI. I think it's a very good question, by the way. Thank you very much. So that's why I really put in a lot of importance about AI literacy. We understand the biases and how we should really approach it, how we use it. Yeah, this happens.
Yeah. And you mentioned AI literacy. Of course, as a linguist, I'm really curious about raising people's linguistic awareness. And I know you are too, obviously, as an English teacher overseas. And I've been thinking a lot about this idea of, I don't know if you were taught this, but I wasn't taught this in my master's program. But once I began teaching English as a second language at the community college level, a colleague of mine who was mentoring me said, now, when you're teaching an advanced language skill, you have to teach content that is easy to understand. If you're going to teach the subjunctive in advanced grammar, you need to talk about something everybody already knows, that the vocabulary is simple, the concepts are simple, and vice versa. When you're teaching a concept that is quite complex, some maybe scientific, sophisticated, I don't know, concept, then you need to lower your expectations about what kind of language they can produce. So I've been thinking about, we've got people learning language or people learning research or people learning something. And now we have this new tool that just generates language. And I'm thinking about that connection between, we have a new tech, it's dumping language at us. And of course, the content, as learners, they're learning the content. And what is this doing in the brain? And so what is the connection?
Yeah.
Question is, after all that, what is the connection between linguistic awareness, particularly in academic English, contributing to AI literacy for non-native speakers or even native speakers, but specifically non-native in your case?
Yeah, if I just would like to confirm if I understood it correctly. So do you mean just they are trying to do many or multiple things at the same time, learning some kind of course, English, it has its own rules, and also this AI? That's a great perspective because I think we accept something as a given, Kimberly, in terms of we are, for example, English Medium Instruction University. 90% all the courses in this university is in English. And you'll have to have proficiency in order to get to your major and everything. Actually, when you say AI literacy, and either it is in Turkish or in English, they communicate in English in their own world. I think we always think that it is like that because for their courses, it's English. For their assignments, it's English. They listen, they speak in English in all the courses. But of course, it's a very great question because when it comes to reading authentic academic texts for a first year college student, why that means they end up using Google Translate or translation. What you wrote, up is very important in terms of, because we also consider it, your colleague had a fantastic suggestion because it's all about cognitive load that they try to cope with. And I totally understand. I think sometimes it's very challenging to just try to learn everything at the same time. And this specific cohort that since 2022 November, they had been, I think, dealing with too much because this is a transition. I just compare it with myself because I grew up in 90s. I knew when there was no internet and then it came. So I feel lucky that I had the experience that I didn't have it and then it came and how it transformed. But I could understand it a little bit later. So this cohort just transition between, yes, they have been, I think, going through a lot cognitively and in terms of maybe from your perspective, linguistically. But I hope, and I would like to be optimistic about that, I hope they will use it to enrich their perspective because they, for example, in my, current research, I have two groups, like control group and experimental group. And one of the groups writes an essay without using an AI tool. The others are free to use it. But the ones who are not allowed to use AI, of course, they can have access to digital dictionaries, maybe a Google translation, because we had them before the AI. But one of them said that because I think they got used to very quickly that one of them had the observation, she had this observation. I just took very long time to write only my thesis statements. It took me so much time because she was in the control group that she couldn't use AI. I think they have already become very lenient on using it, by the way. One thing I understand is that means for them, it makes things easier. Actually, maybe we can say it has made things easier for some of them, for learning language maybe, or cope with both understanding AI and English. So we need more time maybe to understand or get the whole picture. And I hope I didn't go different directions based on your question.
No, that was good. I think you're bringing up there's two interesting things that I want to home in on. One is this idea of, so when we think about research, like there's this journal, for example, that we've published, and we know the editors of the journal, and they've expressed how they work really hard as a journal to have marginalized voices represented. And a lot of times that means scholars from developing countries that might need to work with an editor in order to get their work published in that journal. And about the excitement and the potential for generative AI to now help those scholars publish in journals that maybe they couldn't have because they weren't fluent in English.
Yeah.
And so there's that element of it. And then there's so many scholars who are grappling with, well, what are the boundaries? What's okay? What's not okay? And so those are, and I don't think any of us have the answers. We're all just, it all still seems to be a debate. But then there's this other component of it when you're talking about your students, regardless of the language that their first or second is, something that Kimberly and I talk about is how in the traditional educational hierarchy, you have the educator who transfers the knowledge to the student. Now with generative AI, because you can produce and synthesize knowledge, that it's flipping or at least changing that dynamic where students can now produce and synthesize knowledge at the click of a button. And they don't have to rely on the knowledge transfer from the expert. And what does that mean for education and for that dynamic? I wonder if that's something you've noticed or you've grappled with.
Actually, that's something that I have been thinking about a lot lately. But in terms of teaching English as a second language, it also depends on the culture, because I said that in intercultural rhetoric, for example, I looked at and researched different articles. And I saw that, for example, the student writers in Asia, they were very similar in their approach to education, their beliefs about education, their perception about education. It is very similar to what Turkish students also show as an attitude. They like to be led by someone, which means they don't want to just say that they don't want to be independent. Of course, we all in education, in my also understanding, students should be autonomous, independent, and they can take care of their own learning. But they mostly want to get confirmation from an expert. So in order to feel safer. And that's understanding is similar. For example, because I checked a lot of different research about that in Asia, in Arabic countries, and in Turkey sometimes, just it's similar. Maybe in some cultures and countries, what you say might happen faster. But so I think in some cultures or countries, it might take time, because also what I observe, educators are not very willing to give up on that here, which means they want to be there. So that's why suddenly, just the first thing, they took this action. And in also the institutions that I'm working, and I have been hearing a lot about one of the really good universities, the academic programs, they started to use pen and paper assessment. They just turned into that. Generative AI, as the phenomena, introduces the people to take maybe control of their own learning, and they already have the experts very accessible. I think still education policymakers and instructors, they are resistant to give up on that. And this is something actually, yes, I don't agree with, or I can't support. This is, it's not aligned with my vision of education and approach. But in my talks, in my different talks, I say that I think it will come to a point that they can't resist, and the transformation will come from a reverse direction.
I agree. We already see the students are using it at higher rates than faculty. And I think, of course, it's very context dependent, the level of the learner, what is the topic. Obviously, we're not trying to generalize and make a statement
No.
about all of education
No.
for every student, but we think about personalized learning and the ability to have an adaptive pathway. That seems obviously like a plus, but it's just causing us to rethink and reassess. And I think that is a good thing.
But Jessica, for example, believe me, I have been working with, by the way, teaching assistants. They are my colleagues. And also I'm giving a graduate course teaching. It's a teaching course. And mostly professors are afraid of I can't consciously, I'm using this. Cheating is harder. It's the harder climate. Just if they cheat, if they plagiarize the objective of any educational goal, the objective cannot be that my students shouldn't cheat, or at the end of the course, students will be able to learn that they shouldn't teach. That's not one of the objectives. Can't be. They're so afraid of it.
They are. And it's so interesting. I love how you put that the objective cannot just be not cheating. And the policy cannot just be no policy in the same vein. And yeah, it's just because these tools are going to be embedded into all of the programs that that universities already pay for, are still talking about ChatGPT, but we're way beyond. Some of us have moved way beyond that and see that it's not just ChatGPT, it's that ChatGPT is going to be embedded in your word processing program.
Yeah. I think we have been talking about that it's a paradigm shift. So when we say that, of course, it needs to bring some transformation in our skills, in our cognitive development in the long run, because historically, paradigm shifts bring these. And I have just also posted I listened to a very recent talk about we should work on the fact that I think all the people in terms of integrating generative AI into anything, it could be education, it could be business. And so the thing is, we need to just work on to use it constructively. We need to work on that. It's ubiquitous. It is going to be embedded in everything. It's a general purpose technology. So whatever we touch, whatever we see, it is going to be there. So the first, I think, foremost aim, the purpose that we should work on, you have been doing in an amazing way. I appreciate that. Just for the last 2 years, you have been doing a great job in terms of researchers. And so like this, we should know how to make use of it and how can we spread the function of it in a constructive way that humanity can utilize. Because there are risks. Still, it's going to be there.
Yeah, the risks are there. And like you said, it's a general purpose technology when you just think of generative AI overall. But the true benefit comes when you match that with a human's expertise, disciplinary expertise, objectives. And it all comes back to, this is part of what Kimberly has taught me around rhetoric. Everything comes back to rhetoric. Like, who are you? What is your message? Who is your audience? Regardless of how you're communicating that. And if the use of this technology in collaboration with us can help us achieve those communicative goals better, then that's just a different way of thinking of it. But the technology alone is not useful without that human expertise coming to the table. And I find that when that's a message, educators are a little less fearful because you still have to have knowledge in order to come to the table and get a good use case out of it, essentially.
Totally. Yeah.
One of the things that I have been concerned about, and I want to get your perspective on this as a language teacher, is that now that we have all of this technology to focus on the accuracy of writing, we have a kind of issue with people coming to the table, deliverable items from students, for example, things that they have submitted already looking pretty good. Because we had Grammarly, but I don't think a lot of people were using Grammarly. But now we have Grammarly on steroids. You don't even need to correction. You can just put it in an AI and it outputs this beautifully corrected, perfect in most cases, item product that you're going to submit. And so students may see that as like this perfect ideal. It's just a synthetic precision of language that kind of covers over what's missing, which is depth and connections, deep connections. And so I guess I'm like, have you seen this? And does this reliance pose any sort of risk for like deeper language learning?
Actually, when you say personalized, or maybe I always tell my students that I want to see through the paper their own voice. And maybe mistakes have become something very organic because of that reason. And it was also a metaphor that one of the professors in Oxford Internet Institute was spoken, generative AI. So generative AI, maybe all the models will write love letters, and the love letter would be the same. Everybody could now write a love letter. So maybe the first stage will become the most important thing for people, because beyond love letter, we want to see, according to him, the human touch or the real human value that you bring onto your product will maybe be more important. This is also kind of an assumption, but I think this is important, and I'm trying to say it to my students. I think this had happened a little bit quickly because, yes, we started to see discovering, you have been doing the skim, words come. It has just happened to me today. I received an email from a student in English. It was an apologetic email because he couldn't come to the office hour and he didn't let me know. And the email was really apologetic. And I have been teaching to non-native English speakers who came from Turkish background. And it was totally written by generative AI. And I was thinking, okay, the sentences were fantastic. Okay, it was very kind and polite email. But actually, I don't know if I felt that I was communicating with him really, or I was communicating with kind of in quotation robot. Actually, it's really a deep discussion, but
Mhm.
I always tell my students something like this. Uh, Please use generative AI to learn, to improve, and use it as your writing coach, as your reading coach. But I also give some tips about prompting, but please don't let it bypass your learning. Otherwise, it will deteriorate your own skills that you are going to need in the future. I try to give this message and I say that you can make mistakes, but I want to see your voice. And I say it's like this. For example, I use Ilkemize your writing. For example, mine, please, when you write something, I use their names like this. Kimberlize it. Just, I want to
Yeah.
see you through.
Love
So,
it.
yeah, I think, yeah, I found it. It's nice, right?
Yes,
So,
this is
thank
great.
you.
Ilkemize.
Yes, Ilkemize
That
it.
one, that one just rolls right off the
Yes.
tongue.
Yeah.
Kimberlize.
Yeah.
Jessica's.
Yes,
I love
it's
it.
like that because it writes very well, but also it doesn't have the taste sometimes. Maybe when you
Yeah.
bring your own soul to it, your own voice to it, although it may have mistakes, I can see your effort because learning a new language needs effort. It is very natural that I'll see mistakes. That's part
Right.
of it. That's part of the game. And I want to see them
Yeah.
sometimes so that I can still help them. But I think, Kimberly, I'm lucky that they start seeing that. They start. For example, in my research group of undergrad students, I have computer scientists, I have some psychology students, and they say they evaluate different use of models and they say that no, this is not good. This is better to, for example, when they want to create a bot that will help them about their studies, they can evaluate it, I think, by experimenting.
Yeah. I love what you said earlier. I actually was writing it down. Someone you were talking to said basically like they miss mistakes. They miss this
Yes.
human
Yeah.
element of
Yeah.
the fact of being human is that we are imperfect. And so it's really obvious when something is just I don't know, optimized to the point that we've optimized the humanity out of it, all the mistakes. And yeah, I used to tell my students that too. I actually want to see your mistakes because then I can point to where there's a learning opportunity for you. And let's reframe this as, oh, this is where your countdown or whatever it is. Say that because people don't,
Yeah, I mean,
nature.
that's right. That's right. Because when we were discussing about the dominance of English, by the way, there was this discussion, don't teach your kids coding because it's not going to be necessary anymore. And there was this discussion. And I have been listening to dozens of different podcasts from business leaders and tech giants. And one of them says that the future of generative AI is like the the future of language is English, not coding. I know, and by the way, please don't think that I am accepting this. It is like a very, I think, an ambitious thought because I don't agree with this. Maybe even different languages might be proliferate more. And I hope it's going to be like this, thanks to the translation. But what I want to say is that, for example, in different cultures, I really want my students to value writing. And when I was researching about intercultural rhetoric, one of the Ryuko Kubara in British Columbia in Canada University, I hope I'm saying this correctly, Anglo-Saxon rhetoric might not be that much important or central in education. So that is something we have been experiencing here because they come from high school and background, so they have difficulty in understanding the rhetoric of Anglo-Saxon writing. And they are also trying to build up on their academic English. And all this become so much difficult. They, as I said, they cope with a lot of different challenges while trying to do that. I understand that they might now make use of this. But one thing that I might ask your ideas if you don't mind. Because it's a second language, especially maybe as a applied linguist, Kimberly, you might think about it, because I always want to say that, okay, it is very good to use generative AI to facilitate your language learning. And I understand it very well. And I talked to one of my graduate students who graduated from university, but I still see her and I ask her, like, when I try to write something in English to communicate with a client, I don't really want to bother writing because I can write it with generative AI. I started to see it as a loss of time because she has her own company now, like a startup, and maybe she needs to send several emails in a day in English to different clients, or she wants to write a report, but she doesn't feel the need to write it by herself anymore because there is an agent that can do it for me. So in that case, I have this dilemma about my students because they are now in the learning process. They are still in the learning process. So if they start to rely on it too much, how would it affect their skills in terms of writing? Because writing is a very broad skill, that it's a thinking process. That's something, a dilemma. Maybe Jessica, you have some ideas. How could we approach it more productively without censoring or penalizing anything? That's something that I've been thinking about.
Yeah, it's something I've played around with because I teach an academic writing doctoral students. I have definitely shifted how generative AI is integrated in because I felt like when I introduced it right away, that they were immediately starting to use it in ways that I didn't necessarily want them to. So I decided to stagger it. Now, whether or not they're actually using it, and I don't know, that's a different story. But in terms of intentionally scaffolding the learning and integrating generative AI at certain points, I guess I want them to demonstrate their knowledge without relying on the technology. I think back to just learning math and having to learn things by hand before being allowed to use the calculator. Now I couldn't do half of the math I need to do by hand, but I still use the calculator, but I'm able to understand it and use the calculator correctly because I learned the skills.
Yeah.
And I think that's still important for writing, not just for the product, for the written product itself, but as you said, writing is thinking. I predominantly work with doctoral students who are leaders in their organizations. They are likely going to be conducting some level of research again. And so, it's important for them to have that skill. And part of it is the professionalization process of learning the standards of the profession. And if you just use generative AI all the time, you're not going to learn any of those things. So I think about that specific example of if I haven't learned the standards of my profession or the norms, because I skipped that process and I just use generative AI to write. That's one thing, but who's your audience? Be receptive of that communication because you won't know how to edit it or revise it or prompt any changes if you haven't learned those skills to begin with. And so at the end of the day, communicating is all about not just you, but the party receiving it. And you still need to learn the skills.
Yeah.
Yeah. The thing that came to my mind was when I was teaching English in the community college, we would sometimes get students who had been brought to the US by their families immigrating, and they hadn't yet become literate in their first or home language, and so they weren't writing and reading in their first language, and they get moved. Let's say they're 5 years old and they get tracked into kindergarten, and so now they're learning to read and write in a second language without having that first language literacy, and they really struggled, and I don't know the research in that area, but I just remember that there was some mention of, when you don't have it in your native language, you can't then bring it to any other language as easily. It's a big struggle for them. I don't know if you're familiar with any research in that area, but it also happens with refugees. Any sort of disrupted education a refugee has, and then if they're relocated and they have to learn another language, it's a big struggle.
It's a big struggle for both the students, and this is our routine. Actually, what you have described, it has become the routine because There are some idealist English medium instruction universities in Turkey, and these are just, we call it like foundation universities, which are institutionalized like as a modern American university type colleges. And that's why everything like thesis writing, maybe, or PhD studies, it's like very much like there. So, as you said, we are trying to teach while we are teaching the language, academic English. At the same time, we try to teach argument, thesis statement, rhetoric, cause effect. And of course, all this, for both ways. Actually, we have been, I have a preceding article after conference about that. It's like the intercultural rhetoric in Turkish student academic writing. And it definitely tells this. They have this double challenge. And also for the educator, for the lecturer, also this is the same. They, I think, match this rhetoric with English. And if we ask them to write it in Turkish, that's gone. They can't really maybe adjust this rhetoric in Turkish because it's just like, it's English and that rhetoric. Even me, because I studied English language and literature, and then all my masters, all the other research, everything has been in English. And when we are asked to do something in Turkish, write an article, for example, oh my God, it becomes much more difficult for me to write an academic article in my own language compared to English. You might know. Yeah. And when we come back, when Jessica said about using generative AI when teaching, sometimes in my note taking, I'm analog still. I love note taking. And because it's a good process, it is, of course, we are talking about a different generation. I totally understand that. However, believe me, it becomes a little bit tricky when you teach writing in English as a second language. That's why it becomes a little bit complicated in that sense.
Yeah, because you have all these literacies converging.
Yes.
Traditional literacy and digital literacy, whether it's AI or any other digital skill, it's all this is convergent of all these. And that's what I was trying to get at when I was talking about this idea that if the language is high, then the content needs to be simple and vice versa.
They would like to be successful in whatever they do. They need to bring some difference. And we know that generative AI, yes, it is going to be getting better and better, but still, I think as long as humans exist, we want to see that difference, that their soul, whatever they have, again, I will use maybe, we want to see their unique, maybe idiosyncrasy, whatever, through that thing. That's why, although, for example, I told about my student who writes emails all the time, maybe, or reports in generative AI, for the one who is the audience will make difference. So you need to make some difference, put some difference into whatever you're doing, maybe be more successful or maybe to achieve your goal, because we will start looking for those differences in writing, right? Because we know what generative AI can do.
Yeah, the voice, finding your voice, developing it.
Totally.
Yeah. I think that's a good segue point. Ilkem, this has been a wonderful conversation. I love your perspective. It's always nice to hear what someone else is doing. I feel like we could just continue talking for hours, especially I'd love to talk more about your research. But this is the segment where we talk about our pit and our peach of, could be the week, it could be the month. We just share something particularly good. We call that our peach. And it's something, it doesn't have to be horrible. It could be funny, but something that maybe irritated you, just as a bit of a personal touch. Since I'm already talking, I'll just go first.
Why not?
I say my peach. So I recently had, for the month of November, one of my coworkers and colleagues who lives in South Africa, her name is Tess. She was here staying with me for the month of November, and she traveled with me on Thanksgiving and experienced her first like American Thanksgiving. And it was really funny, like seeing it through her eyes. And she was very excited and everything, she was just like, this is amazing. And so I don't know, it brought a lot of joy to just a very traditional Thanksgiving meal that I've had with my family my entire life. So that was definitely a peach.
Yeah.
I'll have to think about my pit. I'm going to hold that for a minute in case
Okay.
one of y'all want to go ahead and share.
My peach is that I got this wasn't this week, but it was last week. I got to go to the beach. And so my peach is the beach. And boy, that would give Arabic learners, Arabic
Yeah.
speakers have trouble with P and B. Yeah, I went to visit my family and they live pretty close to the Gulf of Mexico. So I went down, visited the beach, and that was lovely, and had Thanksgiving holidays with my mom and cousins. So that was my peach. And my
Great.
pit was that when I got back in town, I had two different banking issues that were happening. One is a check that I deposited didn't go through because I didn't write mobile deposit only on the back of the check. And that was annoying. And so then of course, it was Cyber Monday and I spent money and that money wasn't in that account.
All
So,
right, of course.
and this
They should
horrified my
understand that.
mother for 45 years. And so she was horrified. I thought she was horrified because my Cyber Monday stuff didn't go through. No,
Oh,
she was embarrassed that
yeah.
I didn't have money in the account. And anyway, the major banking issues was my
Oh,
pit after
I'm
my
sorry.
peachy beachy week.
Yeah.
Yeah. What about you?
Yeah. Go ahead, Jessica.
I was just going to say your pit reminded me of something
Uh-huh.
somewhat related that just made me laugh. So this summer, my grandmother, my mama, she's 87. I got her set up with Hulu so that she could stream television at her house, and I paid for it. I put it on my credit. Kimberly's laughing. I put it on my credit card. This was in like June. And I was going through my credit card statements in November, and I saw this recurring charge for Hulu for $88 a month. And I was like, I don't have Hulu. What is this? So I spent an hour on the phone with Hulu because I'd forgotten that I'd done this back in June.
Oh my God.
I'm on the phone with Hulu. Like,
Oh
this
my
is
God.
fraudulent. So they refunded me the money. And then they marked, which I didn't know this because they didn't tell me, but my grandmother's email was used to set it up. So they flagged her email as fraud.
My
So
gosh.
they
That's
cut
so
off her Hulu account. They refunded me the money. And then I found out I didn't know any of this had happened. And then she texted me the next day and was like, my Hulu is cut off. This is so strange. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was your. So then it took 3 hours to fix the mess because they
Yeah.
would not unflag her.
Yeah.
So it was a whole 4 hour ordeal
Oh my
ordeal over
God.
nothing. Over because of
I'm
my memory,
sorry.
because I have the memory of a goldfish.
Oh my God. No, I don't want to open another broad topic. It has been also the case that I'm sorry, I have been thinking about myself, the memory of goldfish, because it happens to me. I think ADHD becomes the norm, unfortunately, just for especially adult women. It has been going, this has been the discussion, Kimberly, especially in adult women. It has been, unfortunately, just spread. It happens to me. So it is really, I understand you, Jessica. I could have spent 4 hours about something because sometimes I look at my credit card excerpt and receipt and I couldn't really, when did I make this purchase? Yeah, I understand you. So you are not alone.
Thank you.
About my peach, I'm sorry, it's not very personal, but it has happened in my lifetime. I was a guest in a live broadcast in Turkey in one of the channels. So I don't know. It was so exciting. So that's why I was so excited about that. Yes, of course, I was nervous at the same time, but all my family, all my close friends were watching me on TV. It was also live on YouTube, and I was talking about generative AI. Oh my God. And then I felt like I was a celebrity. And oh my God, because everyone, you were fantastic. You look beautiful. Oh my God, your necklace. I loved it. Everything was like, and I was like, dream. It was like a dream because afterward, I got a lot of great feedback and it was totally a peach, like for me. Yeah, because it didn't really happen a lot in one life. And about Pet, it just happened today. My mom is like 78 years old and she was alone in the house and I couldn't reach her. Very short time, but I felt so concerned. And then It just came out that the telephone, of course, the mobile is on discreet and she couldn't hear it. But for a very,
So nothing bad happened. So
no,
nothing.
she's
You're
fine.
just you're worried.
But a very short time, I was a little bit panicked, and yeah.
Or at
Cell
that
phones
age.
have done, and cell phones have done that to us. If we can't
Yes.
contact somebody
Yes.
within an hour, then we panic and our minds are like, they've been abducted. They're gone from the earth.
I know. And also, as I said, because she's aged, and at the same time, like today I know that she's alone in the house. I tried to get the security of the compound that she lives, and it was a little bit panic. Yeah, I know. Yeah, it ended up well.
Good.
Jessica,
I know. I
do
feel
you
like
have
we're
a
that.
pit or do you want to skip it?
Oh, that was my pit. The Hulu thing.
Hulu
The
thing.
Hulu thing. Oh, sorry. Okay.
The Hulu was the
I didn't.
pit. And then while Ilkem was talking, I remembered, because she was talking about the goldfish. Remember that day that we probably spent 25 minutes trying to figure out what that $25 monthly charge was on our Moxie credit card bill? It was in Miami. You and I were going through everything. It ended up being associated with our customer support chat charge. So I flagged that as fraud too. So this is a
Oh, no. I don't remember that at all.
We spent like an hour investigating it.
Yes, I know, Kimberly. I know. Yeah, that's another episode.
All the time wasted on the charges we approved.
I
we don't remember.
I know, right? I mean, and to just keep forgetting to cancel subscriptions. Welcome to my world. Yeah.
Yes, that's another story.
Yes.
Ilkem, thank you. This was fantastic. Really enjoyed it.
Talking about AI. And I appreciate all the work, just my fellow female colleagues. I am proud of you and what you have been doing since generative AI emerged. I have been following very closely, and I'm impressed with all the work that you have been doing. And it's great to be here. Thanks a lot for having me.
Well, ditto. We feel the same. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.